The Obi-Wan Kenobi series started out with mixed responses, which I think was the predicted reaction. A brief summary of my opinion is that, like with many modern Star Wars properties, it had a great amount of emotional resonance while falling down on continuity and other technical writing concerns. But I'm not actually here to talk about the overall quality of the show. Most people who like and dislike it have more than reasonable things to point to for their stance. For example, those that resonated mostly with Obi-Wan's loneliness and what I believe so far to be a pretty realistic and unsensationalized portrayal of his PTSD are going to have good feelings about the show. And those that are understandably annoyed by things like the flimsy excuse as to why Obi-Wan specifically has to be the one that saves Leia and how he doesn't know Anakin's alive when a lowly Inquisitor knows who Vader is, are going to find themselves pulled out of the story. There are explanations you can come up with to make these contrivances a little better, but that would just be you writing the script for the creators. But all in all, I liked the show, and I think as long as they keep the focus on Obi-Wan's mental struggle, it will be a worthwhile addition to the Star Wars canon. But it is very easy to see why there are elements of this show people will find annoying. But as I said, that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm interested in Obi-Wan's mental state and how the history between himself and Anakin ties into that. So I'm going to attempt to answer one very important question.
I have failed you, Anakin. I have failed you.
Did Obi-Wan fail Anakin? I touched upon a lot of failings of the Jedi as an order in my last video, but I tried my best to avoid pointing out the actions of individual Jedi unless they could reasonably be considered indicative of the group's attitude and decision-making as a whole, i.e. Shakti in the Fives incident and Yoda trying to help an emotionally troubled and frightened Anakin by reciting Jedi philosophy to him in lieu of any effective emotional support and advice. But even the most group-oriented Jedi are individuals with their own thoughts, feelings, troubles, and morality. I think judging an individual is a very different beast from judging a group. So let's take a look at Obi-Wan and Anakin. How do we define their relationship? There are several subcategories we can place their relationship into: master and student, superior and subordinate, brothers in arms, and dear friends. But I think the most important ones are actually the ones that are at odds with each other, that being parent and child, and brothers in the sibling sense. I think this gets to the heart of what caused a lot of problems in their relationship, how they both saw the relationship and what they wanted out of it. Anakin wanted a parent.
You're the closest thing I have to a father.
But Obi-Wan saw Anakin as a brother.
It is time we became brothers. Master?
Dave Filoni, when talking about Qui-Gon Jinn, said he knew what it meant to take this kid away from his mother when he had an attachment. And he's left with Obi-Wan. I think this can be observed in Liam Neeson's performance. He is always interacting with Anakin the way a typical adult interacts with a child they're close to, rather than the often loving but mostly distant way we see masters interact with their apprentices, bar key exceptions. The thing about Qui-Gon that I've seen in the fandom is people either think he is a wonderful, kind man or a terrible, neglectful master, especially in regards to Obi-Wan. But whether Qui-Gon failed Obi-Wan is a topic for another video. But it is one of the great what-if stories of Star Wars. What if Qui-Gon trained Anakin? Would he still have fallen? So we have a child, fresh out of slavery, taken from his mother and forbidden to ever see her again, and the man that both facilitated that and, at least according to Filoni, and I think backed up by Neeson's performance, emotionally understood what it meant to do that and how to handle Anakin as a result, be the father he needed, died. And he is left with Obi-Wan, who didn't understand that and did not want a Padawan at that time, but rather did it out of obligation to his dying master rather than a want to raise and protect the boy for his own sake. But all things in Star Wars are from a certain point of view, so let's take a look at Obi-Wan's position. We've talked about how Anakin needed a father, but why could Obi-Wan not be that for him? Well, at least in comparison to Qui-Gon Jinn, Obi-Wan was quite an orthodox Jedi. He believed in the code, he believed in the council.
Do not defy the council, Master, not again.
If we compare it to religious people in our world, it's a bit like the difference between someone who interprets their holy text in their own way and has their own personal relationship with their God versus someone who looks to the hierarchy of the established religious order to tell them what is right and wrong. I believe Qui-Gon would have had no problem being the father Anakin needed, but Obi-Wan raised Anakin the way the code and the council demands Jedi children be raised, despite the fact that that was far from what he needed. But even though we can certainly label this as Obi-Wan's doing, can we label it as Obi-Wan's fault? Because he did the right thing by fighting for Anakin, taking in a child who had no one and fulfilling the promise he made to a dying loved one. But he was a 25-year-old man, not necessarily too young to be a father, but still pretty young, newly knighted and fresh off of losing his own parental figure. He had no time to figure out who he was as an independent adult before becoming instantly responsible for the life of another. This combined with the obligation inherent in the situation and them losing what would arguably have been a shared parent is why I think their relationship more closely resembles that of an older sibling raising a younger sibling than parent and child. And that arrangement can definitely work. There are many selfless people out there who raise a younger sibling after a parent dies and do amazing jobs at it. But no matter how great a job is done, it is a different relationship. And many people make it work and succeed, but the circumstances Anakin came from and also the kind of person he is make him more in need of a full-on parent than a brother. Is that Obi-Wan's fault? I don't think so. He did not create this situation, nor was he raised to believe this way of handling a child was wrong. Another reason why the Jedi Order is so toxic and emotionally disabled. Because let's face it, if you are a Jedi, even if you travel all across the galaxy, your world is quite small. Unless you're one of those naturally individualistic thinkers that the upbringing didn't manage to stamp out of you, then you have a very small worldview. Any criticism lobbied at you by non-Jedi is so easily dismissed by the fact that they don't have the Force, they can't feel what you and other Jedi feel, so they don't understand. On the question of whether the Order failed Obi-Wan, yes it did. And it failed every single Jedi right along with him. Not just in the Clone Wars, it had been failing them for a long, long time. And there is another reason as to why I think Obi-Wan's responsibility in this case can be mitigated. Trauma and psychological disorders. Anakin came into this relationship with a large amount of trauma. Living as a slave, being taken from his mother, feeling unwanted by not only the Jedi but Obi-Wan himself. Yeah, even the most capable parent in the world would struggle with a child like that. Younger Jedi looked down on him because he was a slave. Older Jedi distanced themselves from him and distrusted him, likely making him feel more isolated and unwanted. So Obi-Wan was literally all Anakin had. And that is a lot to ask of anyone, let alone a young man in his 20s who's never taken care of children for any significant length of time. I will not make any attempt to diagnose Anakin with anything since I am less than qualified for such a thing, but the chances are fair that he does have some kind of personality disorder. And considering the Jedi Order values uniformity in its ways of thinking, I don't think a neuroatypical person would thrive under their tutelage. That is not to let Obi-Wan off the hook entirely. All these circumstances greatly mitigate his responsibility, but not only as a Jedi and an eventual high-ranking one at that does he warrant his own fair share of blame in the actions and decisions of the group he was a part of, but he also has his own individual responsibility as well. Namely, his teaching approach. One of the things we love most about Obi-Wan is his sass.
Good job.
It's what makes him both charming and likeable, but if we put ourselves in Anakin's shoes, we might see this a little differently. We witness this mostly in Attack of the Clones, where Obi-Wan and Anakin are just not getting along, and Anakin spells out very clearly why that is.
He's overly critical. He never listens. He doesn't understand.
And while most parents and guardians do not understand their teenagers, that is a given, Anakin is clearly a sensitive kid. He thinks about things both too much and not enough, and very much takes things to heart. So when the only person in the world who could claim to love him, besides his mother who he hasn't seen in 10 years, is constantly criticizing him, that has got to weigh on an adolescent mind. Whether you're a parent or a teacher, you have to listen to your kids. You don't need to pacify them, you don't need to agree with them, you don't need to let them do whatever they want. In fact, I very much recommend you do not do any of those things. But you do need to listen to them and be seen to be listening to them. You can't just say, I'm the parent, I'm the teacher, I know better. You may very well know better. But children and teenagers are their own little independent people, and especially if you want well-adjusted, happy children who think for themselves, then you have to give bright minds more than just, it's right because I said so. Because if you succeed, you've created a society built on complacency, groupthink, and confirmation bias, and if you fail, then all you've taught your children is how to look like they're agreeing with you. The best you'll get is,
Think.
Sorry, Master.
You went in there to hide, not to run.
Yes, Master.
Next time, try not to lose it.
Yes, Master. And why don't you listen to me?
this is likely why Obi-Wan and Anakin had a much better relationship when they were closer to equals. But now we come to the last part of the equation. Anakin's responsibility. Now, when talking about what leads people to do bad things, it often feels as though there's an angling for the blame to fall one way or the other, when there are often many factors that lead to it. I still ultimately believe that the buck stops with the individual. There must always be an empathetic point of view to explore as to what led someone to that point. In some cases, it may even mitigate your actions, but unless you are legally insane or otherwise did not have the capacity to understand what you were doing was wrong, or literally had your free will taken from you, you will always be responsible for your own actions. That doesn't mean that Obi-Wan did nothing wrong, or the Council did nothing wrong, or Palpatine did nothing wrong, but the buck stops with Anakin. So in answer to my question, did Obi-Wan fail Anakin? I think the answer to that is yes. But another, maybe more important question is, can he be held responsible for that? And my conclusion is, to a point, but ultimately, no. Did some of his actions contribute to where Anakin ended up? Yes. But if we picture Anakin's fall as a Jenga tower, Obi-Wan may be removed 3 or 4 blocks, while the Council, the Jedi Code, the war, possible mental illness, trauma, Palpatine, and Anakin himself all removed more than their own fair share, leading him to come tumbling down. And he was most likely doing a lot of the work holding the tower up, stacking pieces lovingly and carefully to try and help Anakin become a better man. He just failed.